In today's video, everyone, we're going to be putting the spotlight on our beloved Pilgrim attacker. And no, it's not Scarlet today, but we'll be diving into Snow White. So let's get started. Now, Snow White here is an iron attacker from the Pilgrim class that happens to wield an assault rifle as her weapon. She also does happen to have a weapon change in which she does convert into a sniper weapon when using her burst skill. As for her skill set here, everyone, we have her skill 1, which activates when normal attacks hit 30 times and affects the targets, in which Snow White deals a certain percentage of attack as additional damage, and she also does have a self attack buff of a certain percentage for 5 seconds long when her normal attack hits 30 times. Next up here we have Snow White's skill 2, which affects enemies within the attack range, dealing a certain percentage of attack as damage, and she also has self critical rates up by a certain percentage for 10 seconds long when attacking during full burst time. And last but not least, we have her skill 3 here, which affects herself. She happens to change the weapon in use and swaps to a sniper rifle, in which the charge time is 5 seconds long, but the damage is 499.5% of attack. The full charge damage here does deal 1000% damage, and the maximum ammunition capacity is 1 round. She also does have the additional effect here of Pierce. Moving on to the skill prioritization for Snow White, everyone, in which you should begin by prioritizing her skill 1. Leveling this first will allow you to deal more damage overall due to her self attack buff and through the bonus damage she'll be dealing if you happen to hit the enemy 30 times. The second skill here that you'll prioritize would be her skill 2, in which she'll increase her critical rate by a certain percentage for herself, and she also happens to deal a certain percentage of her attack as damage here as well. But this additional damage doesn't happen to have a restriction like her skill 1 does have. Moving on to Snow White's wisdom cube, everyone, in which I do personally recommend to use the resilience cube. The additional reload speed will help with Snow White's DPS overall, so make sure to place the resilience cube onto your Snow White if you do happen to run her. Now that we're done checking out Snow White's kits, let's dive into the pros and cons of this unit. Now first here we have the pros of Snow White, in which we'll start off with that she is an assault rifle user as well as an attacker class unit, so she'll fit well in pretty much any team that lacks DPS. Next here, she is also a great attacker option if you can surround her with supporters that'll further increase her attack and critical damage. Third of all here, Snow White deals a certain percentage of her attack as additional damage and also increases self-critical rates. Last but not least for the pros, we have her burst skill is very interesting as she swaps weapons to a sniper rifle, which in this case, when it's full charged, deals 1000% of attack as damage and also has pierce, but I wouldn't consider this burst skill too reliable, but it's definitely an interesting skill. Now moving on to the cons of Snow White, starting off with the DPS falls off quite hard if you're using her burst skill. I'd personally prefer not to use her burst as charging her alternative weapon to 1000% takes quite some time, while you can deal much more damage in her normal state. For the second con here, unfortunately she doesn't benefit from 5-second buff timers, for example Litter, which would be the most important burst 1 supporter. And last but not least, there are better options than her overall, such as Scarlet, Privacy, etc. Moving on, everyone, we'll discuss some units that'll work well alongside Snow White if you're really trying to place her into the spotlight. Now take note that these recommendations may throw meta pretty much out of the window for the most part, and we'll mention characters that'll make our featured character really shine their best, damage wise and more. Now to get started, the first unit that'll work well with Snow White is Admi. Now Admi seems to be a great fit alongside Snow White due to her ability to increase reloading speed and critical damage for all allies. Secondly, Admi also happens to be a great fit due to her skill 2 that decreases damage taken for 2 allies with the highest attack. Overall, Admi is a great option for nearly any team composition, and I still personally consider her as underrated. Another unit that'll work well alongside Snow White is Rupee. Now Rupee is another burst 2 character, but she happens to be an attacker while Admi is a supporter, so a unit like Rupee can help in the DPS department alongside Snow White. Now diving into Rupee's skill set, she's just a great support slash attacker hybrid, in which her skill 1 increases stack counts of buffs by 1 for iron allies, and she also does increase critical rates. Secondly, her skill 2 here increases attack by a certain percentage to self, which will help a ton considering the fact that Snow White may suffer to deal consistent DPS. Last but not least, Rupee also increases attack for all allies from her burst skill. Overall, Rupee is a great option that'll help increase DPS throughout the entire team and keep consistency along alongside Snow White. For our third recommendation, I'd personally suggest another Burst 3 character to complement Snow White, as hers isn't too amazing in my opinion. Which brings us to the recommendation of Helm. Now Helm is a great option for nearly any team that lacks sustainability and also has some great buffs throughout her skill set that'll benefit all allies. First up, we have her skill 1 that increases critical rates for all of your allies, normal attacks for 5 seconds when Helm's final bullets hits the enemy. Now a small tip here with Helm that'll help keep this buff active consistently would be just to spam Helm's shots rather than charging fully, in which you'll have nearly 100% uptime of this critical rate buff. Next up, we have Helm's skill 2, which increases all allies damage to enemies interruption parts, which will help in boss fights. And her skill 2 also happens to increase all allies attack damage by a certain percentage when heading into full burst. Last but not least here, we have Helm's burst skill. Now Helm's burst skill is honestly amazing due to the fact that she allows your allies to recover a certain percentage of their attack damage as HP for 10 seconds long. Now overall, Helm is a great burst 3 to complement Snow White, as you'll want to increase DPS overall across the entire team and have that extra burst 3 option. As for additional options, you should make sure to consider a strong burst 1 like Litter, as Litter's honestly too strong to avoid in the burst 1 slot and should always be in a team regardless of the other characters. Another option would be Volume or even Miranda, which is also another underrated character that can boost Snow White's DPS drastically if you're really trying to make her shine. For another burst 3 option, I'd suggest Laplace. She's a great damage dealer that happens to wield a rocket launcher, which is an added bonus for those stages with tons of mobs. Overall, I'd say Snow White is a very solid attacker option. She's not bad by any means, but just requires the necessary supporters to really make her shine. Now I'd personally rank this character an 8.5 at best, as there are better options out there, but she's definitely a sick character that should be considered more. Now if you enjoyed this Snow White's character guide, make sure to leave a like on this video and subscribe to the channel. Also be sure to leave a comment below letting me know what you thought of this video, as I'm always open to constructive criticism and look forward to improving my future character spotlights. But with all of that being said, I'll catch you all in the next Nikke video. Thank you all so much for watching.